Welcome to the Animation 2 video tutorials. In these tutorials I'll teach you about the compose mode and how to blend multiple animations together to get a final animation. First we need to create a few animations. In this introduction video we're going to go through some of the settings and the rig to make sure you understand where we're going to start from. Let's change a few settings in the interface that will make animating a bit easier in this tutorial series. First, while you're in file mode, set your project directory. I have it set inside an Animation 2 folder under a folder called Dinosaur. Click OK. The next thing is make sure the channel edit is set to motion. Left mouse click and highlight it so that it will record only translation and rotations. If you set it to all, it will record all of the channels including scale and extra channels that you don't know about. To double check that, go to the Edit tab and expand the Edit tab under Keyframe Editing block. Make sure the key edit is set to motion, which is the translation and rotation, the same way down here in the bottom right, and spline edit uses the same key edit settings. The other option that we need to set here in keyframe editing is edit frame. What this means is anything that is selected in the graph editor will be selected underneath where the time slider is. If a key exists under the time slider, it will automatically highlight. So when you're in animate mode and you're editing values inside the motion block, you're always editing the value that's on the current frame that you're viewing in the 3D view. Make sure you understand how chord sys works. If you have any doubts about what anything is doing inside the 3D view, usually mousing over a button will tell you what the button does. Make sure you understand what chord sys is. I usually turn it off. That way I have the default manipulator, which means when I left mouse click, I move everything in the parent coordinate space, which is the coordinate space that keyframes are stored in inside Messiah. Right mouse clicking moves things in local coordinate space, which means Messiah figures out the proper angle to store into the parent space. I'll usually tell you if I'm moving in local coordinate space. So when I'm moving things around, usually I will move things with the left mouse button, which moves them always in parent space. I may turn on chord sys every once in a while to move things around in alternate spaces, for example, world space or screen space. I'm just going to toggle that off. To set keyframes, you can middle mouse click and set a keyframe in the dope cell. This will set a key on everything that's selected. It's based on this list here, which will key all selected items, or in our case, we're going to be keyframing groups. To delete anything, you can right mouse click on the highlighted cell and delete it, or marquee select the different curves and right click to delete them. To set keyframes, tap the Enter key. It's going to use the active edit, which is set to selected items right now, and it's going to create a key at the current frame unless you type something else in. Tap the Enter key a couple more times and you can set keyframes. So keyframe setting rapidly is usually tapping the Enter key 3 times. To delete a key, tap the Delete key and then hit Enter twice. It will delete it at that frame, or you can type in a different frame range. If you create a keyframe in the dope cell, you can move that keyframe around by left clicking and dragging back and forth. Right clicking will deselect a key. Middle click will set a key. Oh, one more option inside the edit. Make sure you hide inactive keys. Inactive keys are those keys that will show up as tiny little crosses on the curves. Those keys just get in the way. We want to see solid keyframes on everything. Let's go back to File mode. Let's go to File and Load from the Scenes folder, dinorig.fxs. Let's replace the current scene, and this is our rig. I'm going to walk you around the different options of this rig. You'll notice that all the bones are blue. That means that they're part of a group. The main bone is not part of a group because you're going to be moving this independently around as an animation is playing on all the other groups later on in different tutorials. Now the item filter, if we go to animate mode, is set to all items. That shows everything that I used to create in here. At the very top we have our camera, we have the mesh. Buried underneath the mesh are a couple of curves, the bone deform, and the thing that says Dino Torso ME is actually the weighting mask that I've applied using meta effectors to make this dinosaur deform more accurately. Underneath that is our main hierarchy. So anything that has a color on it will be keyframeable. So filter this list by going to groups, and I've already created a group that has all of those bones in it called Dino_Body Keys. This will show everything that we keyframe and nothing else that we can't key. The next thing you need to do is make sure that you are set from selected items to either use the item list, the things that are listed in the list, or set it to the group. In this case, the primary group, the only group that's on there, is Dino_Body Keys. That way, if we move to say frame 80, middle mouse click, we're setting a keyframe for everything in the group. I'm going to tap the Delete key to delete the keyframe from frame 80, and we'll scrub back to frame 0. So here's how the rig works. I'm using the Alt and left mouse button to rotate around the scene. Use the A key to center your selections. And everything here was built for a simple purpose of making this easier to animate and to provide as many different examples of how animation is supposed to carry through on different hierarchies. So we'll start with the simplest one, which is the tail. The tail is a straight hierarchy. That is, it goes tail 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way down. I've only applied a few extra expressions to make the tail curve properly. So you have the first tail control and the second tail control. And it is a straight hierarchy, so we can do our S curves in the hierarchical fashion as we animate. The hips move up and down, move the entire body up and down. These little bones right behind the hips are actually the knee controls. They only have a single channel selected, which lets you pivot the knees in and out, help you align the knees. The spine is also a straight hierarchy, meaning that everything else that's underneath the hierarchy moves up and down, and you're just going to be keyframing direct forward kinematics on the spine. The shoulders are the same way. They're only set to one single channel. They only need to move a little bit, but the hands are inverse kinematic. Tap the A key to center the hands. The hands actually move in a world space. So if you turn on Chord Sys, and you could set it to parent or world, parent space is actually that of the spine. So you can move these hands just by picking the wrist and translating them around. I'm using the left mouse button to move this around in its parent space, and the hands are IK. Now the feet are IK because we want the feet glued to the ground and to interact with other objects, being independent of the body. Tap the A key. The toes are all forward kinematic, so you move the first joint and then move the child. Same thing with the dew claws and the fingers. The head is what's known as a broken hierarchy. The head operates independently of the body, so we will be doing some different kinds of keyframing for follow-through and S-curves on the head. So the head will be able to move independently of the body. I have a couple of expressions set up so that it will stretch and use a little spline motion and spline interpolation to keep the neck looking a little more fluid. And so your job as an animator is to make sure that the neck doesn't stretch abnormally. Since you can move the head independent of the neck, you can get some pretty good movement around there. The jaw is straightforward kinematic, so we can just use that to close the hand. So everything here is set up in a fashion that we can function with straight hierarchies, doing S-curves and follow-through and dynamics on those, dynamics on straight hierarchies through the spine, broken hierarchies like IK hierarchies, such as making the hands move independently of the shoulder blades, the feet move independently of the hips, and the head moving independently of the body. This will all look really cool once we get keyframes put in. So I'm going to go into Setup and set this back to its default position, tapping the Enter key. Make sure the key is at frame 0 by punching in 0. Tap the Enter key 2 more times, and when I go back and animate, he's set back to his default position. This position is not the best position to start any animations out in. For one, it's the rigging pose, and two, he doesn't look very natural. He looks very symmetrical, which most animals do not. So we need to set a default position that we can start from every time we want to start a new animation. So the first thing you need to do is put him in a more natural pose so that he can start other animations from. We'll start with the head and the hips. Middle mouse click to select an object. Shift, middle mouse click, pick the head. I'm going to turn on multi-edit, which is the E down here on the bottom, or type E on the keyboard, and move them down in Y. It's going to move them also backwards on Z to position his center of gravity over the center of the world. Okay, middle mouse click, pick the jaw, we'll close him. He doesn't want a default position on the jaw. He looks very symmetrical. His feet should not stay on the same plane along Z. So middle mouse pick the foot, and this foot has a Y value of 0, and that's an important thing to understand. The foot is also in the middle of the toe instead of at the tip or at the base. This allows him to pivot up off of his toes, and then you can curl his toes in later. I'm just going to undo those. His first foot here is going to move backwards, and I'm going to try the left foot moving forward about the same amount, so he will stay balanced in a center of gravity. Let's go back to perspective view and rotate his toes out a little bit. Splay them. Need to set his dew claw in so it's not spread out. Same thing goes with the hands. Use the A key to center the selection and just use Alt and left mouse button to rotate around the scene. And close the hands in a little. And another example on how to move around these hierarchies when these hierarchies have very strange coordinate systems. I have everything set to parent, which is what you usually have when you left mouse click and move along any axes. We're going to move these hands closer together. It's going to pull his hands in. But if I just want to bank these, it looks kind of strange in parent view. If I right mouse click, well, turn off QuartzSys. If I right mouse click, now heading becomes that, and I can just right mouse click and move heading, but take a look at what the angles are doing. The angle indicator on the manipulator is actually moving in a different way than the manipulator is moving in local coordinate systems. And this may cause a problem when animating because the curves that you are setting here, the position inside the 3D view, is going to look completely different in the curve editor. Take a look down here, and here's a simple rule. If heading and bank are over 90 degrees each, or they both seem to have similar values, you need to change something. The easiest way is to start a whole new pose from this. So I'm going to set these all to 0, using the tab key to move through. Do the same thing with the left hand here. And then I'm going to go back, I'll switch to a left view, use the A key, and then recreate this pose using as few angles as possible. Which in this case, using pitch to rotate the hands down, and bank to rotate them in. Now that I've made the angles look a little bit more normal, as I'm keyframing, I won't get any strange artifacts. That is, his hand won't spin awkwardly moving from one keyframe to the next because I moved it in local coordinate systems and let Messiah try to figure out my angles. So the hands are moved in. Let's move the legs in. Using middle mouse click to select. That leg is moved forward, but his knee needs to turn out, so I'm picking the knees on here just to align them again. Let's go to top view. He still looks pretty symmetrical. The rule I have here on hips is draw an imaginary line between one foot and the other foot, and you have this line. You aim the hips in the opposite direction. So that's where the hips go. So they don't need to aim too far. The spine, rotate back a little bit more, makes it look more natural, and now that our tail is offset, we can finish making this look asymmetrical by putting an S-curve in the tail. The head, being independent of the body, can stay where it's at, right down the center. So let's take a look at our first pose. This is a more natural pose that he can start other poses from. This will be our stance. I'm going to go back, go to File, and I'm going to save this scene as Dino Rig Stance. Let's save that.